The thunder crashed across the endless Montana sky, sending the cattle into a panic as Olivia Valentine clutched her threadbare shawl tightly around her shoulders, the icy rain pelting her face with merciless fury. She had nowhere to go, no shelter in sight across the vast, unforgiving plains until a tall figure on horseback emerged from the downpour, his silhouette cutting through the storm like a knife. Owen Xanders pulled his horse to a halt beside the drenched woman, his weathered face a mask of concern beneath his wide-brimmed hat. Without a word, he extended a calloused hand down to her, and when she hesitated, lightning split the sky, illuminating the kindness in his eyes. "Miss, you'll catch your death out here," he shouted over the howling wind. "Let me help you." It was 1878, and the untamed Montana territory was no place for a woman alone. Olivia had learned this lesson the hard way after fleeing Boston 3 weeks prior, her reputation in tatters and her heart broken by a man who'd promised her everything only to leave her with nothing. The stagecoach that had been carrying her to her cousin's homestead had broken an axle 10 miles back, the driver continuing on foot to fetch help while the passengers scattered to find shelter. She had walked until her feet blistered inside her impractical Eastern shoes, and now, as she looked up at the stranger offering salvation, she realized she had no choice but to trust him. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice nearly lost in the roar of the storm as she placed her trembling hand in his. With surprising gentleness, Owen pulled her up behind him, the warmth of his body a stark contrast to the biting cold that had seeped into her bones. "Hold tight," he instructed, and she wrapped her arms around his solid frame, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her palms. They rode in silence through the deluge, the horse picking its way carefully across the slick terrain. After what felt like an eternity, a small cabin came into view, its windows glowing with the warm light of a fire inside. Owen dismounted and helped Olivia down, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with a face that spoke of hardship and determination. His eyes were the color of the sky after a storm, clear and penetrating. "It ain't much," he said, gesturing toward the cabin, "but it's dry and there's food and coffee." "I'm grateful for your kindness, Mr. Xanders, Owen Xanders," he tipped his hat. "And you are Olivia Valentine." She extended her hand in a formal gesture that seemed oddly out of place in the wilderness, but Owen took it gently, his rough skin against her soft palm sending an unexpected warmth through her body. The cabin was indeed small but meticulously kept. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, and the scent of coffee and something savory filled the air. Owen busied himself stoking the fire while Olivia stood dripping on the wooden floor, unsure what to do with herself. "Here," Owen said, handing her a bundle of clothing. "These belong to my sister. She's gone now, married a banker in Helena last spring. They should fit well enough until your things dry." Olivia thanked him and changed behind a screen in the corner of the room, emerging in a simple blue calico dress that hung a bit loose on her slender frame. She found Owen pouring coffee into tin mugs, his back to her. When he turned, his eyes widened slightly. "Suits you," he said quietly, then cleared his throat. "The dress, I mean." She felt her cheeks flush and accepted the coffee he offered. "Mr. Xanders, I don't know how to thank you properly. If you hadn't come along when you did, don't mention it. Out here, we look after one another. It's the only way to survive." He gestured to a chair at the small table. "Sit, eat something. Then you can tell me what brings a fine Eastern lady to the middle of nowhere during storm season." Over a simple but hearty meal of beans, bacon, and sourdough bread, Olivia shared her story. She had been engaged to a prominent Boston businessman, the match arranged by her father to save their failing shipping company. 2 days before the wedding, she discovered her fiancé had been unfaithful with her own lady's maid. When confronted, he'd laughed and told Olivia that business marriages rarely precluded a man's entertainments. Heartbroken and humiliated, she had fled west to her cousin Catherine's homestead near Fort Benton, where she hoped to start anew, away from the whispers and pitying glances of Boston society. "And what of you, Mr. Xanders?" she asked, studying him across the table. "What brought you to this wild country?" Owen's expression darkened momentarily. "The war," he said simply. "After Gettysburg, I couldn't go back to Pennsylvania. Too many ghosts." He stood abruptly, collecting their empty plates. "The storm's set in for the night. You can take the bed." "I'll sleep by the fire," Olivia protested, but Owen was firm. "My ma would haunt me if I let a lady sleep on the floor," he said with a hint of a smile that transformed his serious face. That night, as the wind howled outside and rain lashed against the cabin walls, Olivia lay awake in Owen's bed, surrounded by his scent leather, pine, and something indefinably masculine. She thought about the quiet strength in his hands, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he almost smiled, and the flutter she felt in her chest when he looked at her. It was foolish, she knew, to feel this way about a stranger, especially after her recent heartbreak. Yet there was something about Owen Xanders that made her feel safe in a way she never had before. Morning brought clear skies and the chirping of birds. Olivia woke to find the cabin empty, a note on the table informing her that Owen had gone to check on his cattle. She took the opportunity to tidy the small space, finding comfort in the domestic task. When Owen returned, he paused in the doorway, surprise evident on his face at the sight of Olivia humming softly as she swept the floor. "You didn't have to do that," he said, removing his hat. "I wanted to repay your kindness somehow." She set the broom aside. "Mr. Xanders, I must impose upon you further. Could you direct me to Fort Benton? My cousin will be worried." A shadow crossed Owen's face. "Fort Benton's a 3-day ride and there's another storm brewing." "I can see you there once it passes." He hung his hat on a peg by the door. "That is, if you don't mind staying a few more days." Olivia found that she didn't mind at all. The days that followed fell into a pleasant rhythm. Owen taught Olivia basic tasks around the homestead: how to collect eggs from the cantankerous hens, milk the cow, and tend the vegetable garden. She, in turn, improved their meals with herbs she found growing wild and showed Owen how to mend his shirts properly. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, Owen carving wooden figures with his pocket knife, while Olivia read aloud from one of the few books he owned, mostly practical guides to farming and animal husbandry, but also a worn copy of the Iliad that had belonged to his father. On the third night, as Olivia read about Hector and Andromach's farewell, she looked up to find Owen watching her intently, the wooden figure forgotten in his hands. "You have a gift," he said softly, "the way you bring the words to life." "I've always loved stories," she replied, closing the book. "They were my escape when," she stopped, remembering the stuffy drawing rooms of Boston, the endless rounds of meaningless social calls, the suffocating expectations. "When what?" Owen prompted. "When life became too confining." She met his gaze. "Have you ever felt trapped, Mr. Xanders, like you were living someone else's idea of what your life should be?" He nodded slowly. "After the war, my family expected me to take over my father's law practice, but I couldn't sit behind a desk after what I'd seen. I needed open sky." He gestured around the cabin. "This is freedom to me." "It's beautiful," Olivia admitted. "Harsh but honest. In Boston, everything is hidden behind polite smiles and proper manners." Owen smiled, a real smile that transformed his face. "You're not what I expected, Miss Valentine." "Oh, and what did you expect? Someone who'd complain about the dust and the lack of proper society. Instead, you're out there collecting eggs from devil hen like you've been doing it all your life." They laughed together, and something shifted between them, a recognition, a possibility. The following morning, dark clouds gathered on the horizon. Owen frowned as he studied the sky during their breakfast. "That's not an ordinary storm coming," he said, concern etching lines around his eyes. "We need to prepare." They spent the day securing the animals and reinforcing the cabin's shutters. As they worked side by side, their hands occasionally brushing, Olivia felt a growing awareness of Owen, the breadth of his shoulders as he lifted heavy boards, the concentration in his eyes as he hammered nails, the gentleness with which he handled the frightened animals. By late afternoon, the wind had picked up considerably, driving dust and debris before it. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and lightning flashed across the darkening sky. "Inside, now," Owen said, his voice urgent as he guided Olivia toward the cabin. They had barely made it through the door when the first raindrops fell, fat, heavy drops that quickly became a torrent. The storm grew in intensity, the cabin creaking and groaning under the onslaught. Olivia jumped as a particularly loud crack of thunder shook the windows. "It's all right," Owen reassured her, building up the fire to combat the sudden chill. "This place has weathered worse." As the evening wore on, the storm showed no signs of abating. Wind screamed around the cabin's corners, and rain hammered against the roof like 1,000 tiny fists. Owen had just finished checking that the shutters were secure when a terrible splintering sound came from above. "The roof," he shouted, as water began to drip through a widening crack in the ceiling. He grabbed a bucket to catch the worst of it, but more leaks appeared as the minutes passed. "We need to move to the corner," he instructed, pulling Olivia away from the weakening section of roof. "It's the strongest part of the cabin." They huddled together as the storm raged, the cabin's interior growing increasingly damp despite their efforts. When Olivia began to shiver, Owen wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, his arm remaining protectively across her back. "I've never seen a storm like this," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. Owen's expression was grim. "They come up sudden out here. The worst I've seen strip the bark right off the trees." He glanced at her pale face. "But don't worry, we're safe enough." As if to mock his words, a section of the roof gave way with a tremendous crash, sending water cascading into the cabin. Owen reacted instinctively, pulling Olivia against his chest and covering them both with a tarpaulin he grabbed from nearby. For what seemed like hours, they remained huddled beneath the makeshift shelter, Owen's body shielding Olivia from the worst of the elements. She could feel his heart pounding against her cheek, his arms strong and steady around her even as the storm did its best to tear their sanctuary apart. Eventually, the fury of the tempest began to subside, the thunder growing more distant, the rain lessening to a gentle patter. When Owen finally pulled back the tarp, they surveyed the damage in silence. Half the roof was gone, the floor was flooded, and their few possessions were scattered and soaked. "Are you hurt?" Owen asked, his eyes scanning Olivia's face with concern. She shook her head, suddenly aware of their proximity. His face was inches from hers, his breath warm against her cheek. "You protected me," she whispered. Something flickered in Owen's eyes, vulnerability, longing before he stepped back, clearing his throat. "We should salvage what we can." "Dawn's not far off." They worked through the night, moving what remained of their supplies to the dry corner, wringing out soaked clothing and planning repairs. By morning, exhaustion had set in, but the sky had cleared to a brilliant blue that seemed to mock the destruction below. Owen surveyed the damaged roof, his expression unreadable. "It'll take weeks to rebuild properly," he said finally, "and more materials than I have on hand." "What will you do?" Olivia asked, standing beside him. He turned to face her, his expression softening. "First, I'm taking you to your cousins as promised, then I'll come back and start over." He touched her arm gently. "I'm sorry about all this." "Don't be," she replied earnestly. "You saved my life twice now." They set out the next morning, salvaged provisions packed into Owen's saddlebags, his horse carrying them both along the muddy trail. Olivia sat behind him, her arms around his waist, her cheek occasionally resting against his back when fatigue overtook her. The journey to Fort Benton took 4 days instead of 3, the trails washed out and treacherous after the storm. They camped under the stars, Owen always ensuring Olivia had the better spot, the warmer blanket, the larger portion of food. Each night, they talked long into the darkness about their childhoods, their dreams, the events that had shaped them. Olivia found herself sharing thoughts she'd never voiced aloud, and Owen, initially taciturn, gradually revealed the scars the war had left on his soul. On the final night of their journey, as they sat beside a small fire, the vast Montana sky ablaze with stars above them, Owen suddenly stood and walked a few paces away, his back to Olivia. "What is it?" she asked, concerned by his abrupt movement. He didn't turn. Tomorrow you'll be with your cousin, back to civilization. His voice was strained. And I'll return to my land. Olivia rose and approached him cautiously. Owen. It was the first time she had used his given name, and it hung in the air between them, intimate and significant. He faced her then, his expression raw with emotion. I don't want to take you to Fort Benton, he admitted quietly. God help me, Olivia, I want you to stay with me. Her heart stuttered in her chest. Owen, I know it's madness, he continued, the words rushing out now. We've known each other barely a week. You're educated, refined. I'm just a homesteader with a half-destroyed cabin and nightmares that wake me screaming. But these days with you, he stopped, seeming to struggle for words. Olivia stepped closer, her hand reaching up to touch his face. These days have been the most real of my life, she whispered. Owen's eyes widened, hope and disbelief warring in their depths. Slowly, as if giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle at first, questioning, but when Olivia responded, her fingers threading through his hair, the kiss deepened into something hungry and desperate. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Owen rested his forehead against hers. I have nothing to offer you, he murmured. No fine house, no social position. I've had those things, she replied, her hands framing his face. They didn't make me happy. This is what I want. The intensity of his gaze made her tremble. Are you certain? Life out here is hard, Olivia. Winters that can kill, summers that can burn the skin right off you, and always the threat of injury or illness with no doctor for 50 miles. I'm not afraid, she said and meant it. Not when I'm with you. Owen kissed her again, then stepped back, his expression suddenly serious. If we do this, I want to do it proper. He took her hands in his. Let me speak to your cousin first, then, if she approves, we'll marry before we return home. Home, the word sent a thrill through Olivia, not the half-destroyed cabin, but the place where Owen would be. Yes, she said simply. They arrived at Catherine Valentine's homestead the following day. Catherine, a plump, practical woman in her 40s, had married a fur trader 20 years earlier and now ran a successful trading post on the outskirts of Fort Benton. She welcomed Olivia with tearful embraces and Owen with shrewd assessment. So you're the man who rescued my cousin, she said over dinner that evening. Twice, according to Olivia. Owen shifted uncomfortably under her scrutiny. Any decent man would have done the same, madam. Catherine's eyes twinkled. Perhaps, but not every man would have made such an impression on my bookish, Boston-bred cousin that she's ready to become a homesteader's wife after knowing him a week. Olivia blushed furiously, but Owen met Catherine's gaze steadily. I love her, Mrs. Valentine. I can't offer her luxury, but I swear before God I'll keep her safe as long as I draw breath. Catherine studied him for a long moment, then nodded. I believe you, Mr. Xanders, and call me Catherine. We're to be family, after all. The wedding took place 3 days later in Fort Benton's small church. Olivia wore a simple white dress that Catherine had hastily altered, and Owen wore his only suit, freshly pressed by Catherine's housekeeper. The ceremony was brief, attended only by Catherine, her husband, and a few curious townspeople who had heard the romantic tale of the Boston lady and the homesteader who had rescued her from a storm. When the minister pronounced them man and wife, Owen kissed Olivia with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. As they signed the marriage register, he whispered, I promised before God to keep you safe, and I will, Olivia Xanders, every day of our lives together. They spent a week in Fort Benton, gathering supplies for rebuilding the cabin and starting their life together. Catherine, delighted to have family nearby, lavished them with wedding gifts, practical items like cookware and linens, but also books for Olivia and tools for Owen. The journey back to the homestead was filled with plans and dreams. Olivia spoke of starting a small school for the children of neighboring homesteaders, while Owen described improvements to the cabin and expanding his cattle herd. They camped beneath the stars each night, no longer maintaining the polite distance of their earlier journey, instead learning each other's bodies with wonder and growing passion. When they finally crested the rise that overlooked Owen's land, Olivia gasped. Where the damaged cabin had stood, a dozen men were working, the frame of a new roof already taking shape. What? she began, turning to Owen in confusion. His expression was as surprised as hers. I don't understand. They rode down to the construction site, where a burly man with a red beard hailed them cheerfully. There's the man of the hour. Heard you got yourself hitched in town, Tom Jenkins, Owen said, dismounting and helping Olivia down. What's all this? Tom grinned. Catherine sent word about your situation. Said her new cousin by marriage needed a proper roof over her head. We figured it was the least we could do, seeing as you helped half of us through that blizzard last winter. Olivia looked around in amazement as more faces appeared, neighbors from miles around, some she recognized from town, others complete strangers, all working together to rebuild their home. I don't know what to say, Owen stammered, clearly moved. Tom clapped him on the shoulder. No need to say anything. Out here we look after our own, just like you said. Now introduce us to your bride and then grab a hammer. We aim to have this roof done before sundown. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. The cabin was not only repaired but expanded, with neighbors contributing labor and materials. A small schoolroom was added when word spread of Olivia's teaching experience, and by midsummer, children from surrounding homesteads were riding in for lessons 3 days a week. Owen expanded his herd and planted additional crops, working from dawn until dusk alongside hired hands. Olivia took to homesteading life with surprising ease, her determination overcoming her lack of experience. She learned to preserve food for the winter, to shoot a rifle accurately enough to protect the chickens from foxes, and to treat minor injuries and illnesses using Catherine's well-thumbed medical guide. Their evenings were spent together by the fire, sometimes reading aloud as they had during those first days, sometimes simply talking or sitting in companionable silence. And each night they fell asleep in each other's arms, their bodies fitting together as perfectly as their lives had come to do. Autumn arrived with startling swiftness, the plains ablaze with golden light and the first hints of frost glittering on the grass each morning. The harvest was brought in, the animals prepared for the coming cold, and the cabin made snug against winter's approach. One evening, as the first snow flurries danced outside their windows, Olivia sat at the table mending one of Owen's shirts while he cleaned his rifle nearby. The domesticity of the scene struck her suddenly, bringing a smile to her lips. "What are you thinking?" Owen asked, catching her expression. "That I'm happy," she replied simply. "Happier than I ever imagined possible." He set aside his work and came to kneel before her, taking her hands in his. "Even with winter coming, no fancy balls or theater performances to attend," she laughed and leaned forward to kiss him. "I don't miss those things at all, though I do miss hot baths occasionally." Owen's eyes lit with mischief. "That can be arranged, Mrs. Xanders." He rose and began heating water on the stove, filling their largest tub with steaming water and placing it near the fire. As Olivia sank into the makeshift bath with a sigh of pleasure, Owen watched her with undisguised adoration. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he said, his voice husky. She smiled up at him. "Even covered in dust and wearing men's trousers to muck out the barn." "Especially then," he replied, kneeling beside the tub to wash her hair with gentle hands. "Because you're doing it for us, for our home." Later, as they lay entwined beneath the quilts Catherine had given them as a wedding gift, Olivia traced the scar that ran along Owen's collarbone, a reminder of Gettysburg that would never fully fade. "I have something to tell you," she whispered against his skin. He shifted to look at her, concern immediately etching his features. "What is it?" She took his hand and placed it low on her belly. "We're going to have a child, Owen, in the spring." For a moment he was perfectly still, his eyes wide with shock. Then, to Olivia's surprise, tears welled up and spilled down his weathered cheeks. "A baby," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Our baby." His reaction melted any lingering fears Olivia had harbored about bringing a child into this harsh but beautiful world. Owen gathered her close, his hands cradling her stomach with reverence. "I promise," he said fiercely, "I will protect you both with everything I am." Winter descended in earnest, blanketing the land in pristine white and confining them largely to the cabin. They used the time to prepare for the baby, Owen carving a cradle while Olivia sewed tiny garments. The school children still came when weather permitted, now joined by their mothers who brought gifts of preserved fruits and hand-knitted blankets for the coming child. On Christmas Eve, as a blizzard raged outside, Owen presented Olivia with a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a locket containing a lock of his hair. "So you'll always have a piece of me close to your heart," he explained, fastening it around her neck. Her gift to him was a journal bound in leather, its pages filled with the story of their meeting and marriage, written in her elegant hand. "So our child will know how their parents found each other," she said as Owen reverently turned the pages. The night grew wilder, the wind screaming like a living thing as it battered the cabin. Despite the sturdy new roof and walls, drafts found their way inside, making the candles flicker and the fire dance erratically in the hearth. "Worst Christmas storm I can remember," Owen remarked, adding another log to the fire. Olivia wrapped her shawl more tightly around her shoulders, her other hand resting protectively over her slightly rounded belly. "Will the animals be all right?" "They're secure in the barn," he reassured her, though concern lingered in his eyes. "I checked everything twice before it got dark." A particularly violent gust shook the cabin, sending a shower of snow down the chimney and onto the hearth with a hiss. Owen frowned and reached for his coat. "Where are you going?" Olivia asked, alarmed. "Just to check that everything's holding. I won't be long." He pulled on his coat and reached for his hat, the same wide-brimmed Stetson he'd worn when he first found her in the storm all those months ago. "Owen, please don't go out there," she pleaded, rising awkwardly from her chair. He crossed to her and kissed her forehead. 10 minutes, that's all. I need to make sure nothing's coming loose that could cause damage." Before she could protest further, he was gone, the door closing firmly behind him as the wind howled in triumph at gaining even momentary access to their sanctuary. Olivia paced the floor, counting the minutes, her heart racing every time the cabin creaked or the wind found a new angle of attack. 10 minutes passed, then 15. When 20 had elapsed with no sign of Owen, real fear began to set in. She was reaching for her own coat when the door finally burst open, admitting a snow-covered figure that she recognized with relief as her husband. Owen stomped his feet and shook the snow from his clothes, his face red with cold. The barn roof was starting to lift at one corner, he explained through chattering teeth. Had to secure it before it tore away completely. Olivia helped him out of his frozen garments and sat him by the fire, wrapping him in blankets and pressing a cup of hot coffee into his hands. As the color returned to his face, she noticed a gash across his forehead, blood mixing with melted snow. "You're hurt," she exclaimed, reaching for the medical guide and bandages they kept ready. Owen touched his head gingerly. "A piece of wood caught me when the wind changed. It's nothing." But Olivia insisted on cleaning and bandaging the wound, her fingers gentle as she worked. When she had finished, Owen caught her hands and pressed them to his lips. "I'm sorry I worried you," he said softly. She sank into his lap, mindful of her growing belly, and rested her head against his chest. "I was afraid," she admitted. "Out here, something as simple as a storm can turn deadly so quickly." His arms tightened around her. "I promise to keep you safe, remember? Nothing's going to happen to me or to you or to our child." As if sensing the emotion of the moment, the baby chose that instant to move for the first time, a fluttering sensation that made Olivia gasp. "What is it?" Owen asked, alarmed. She took his hand and placed it on her belly. "Wait," she whispered. For a moment, nothing happened, then came another faint movement, Owen's face transformed with wonder. "Is that—" "Yes," she laughed through sudden tears. "That's our baby." The storm continued through Christmas Day, but they hardly noticed, wrapped in their own private joy. They exchanged stories of their childhoods, spoke of their hopes for their child, and made plans for the spring and beyond. When the blizzard finally subsided 2 days later, they emerged to find the world transformed, familiar landmarks buried under drifts taller than a man. The landscape scoured into strange, beautiful shapes by the wind. "It's like the world has been made new," Olivia marveled as they stood together on the porch, surveying the glittering expanse. Owen put his arm around her shoulders. "That's how I felt when I found you," he said, "like everything was new again." The remainder of the winter passed in relative peace, broken only by a bout of influenza that swept through the region in February. Olivia fell ill first, her pregnancy making the fever particularly worrisome. Owen refused to leave her side, cooling her brow with damp cloths and spooning broth between her parched lips. When the fever finally broke after 3 terrifying days, he held her as she wept with relief. "The baby?" she asked fearfully. Owen placed his hand on her now prominent belly, feeling the strong movements within. "Still fighting," he assured her. "Strong, like its mother." Spring arrived late but gloriously, the prairie erupting in a riot of wildflowers that carpeted the land as far as the eye could see. Olivia, now heavy with child, spent hours sitting on the porch Owen had built for her, reading or simply watching the changing sky. Their baby, a daughter they named Catherine Hope, was born on a perfect May morning, with the assistance of a midwife from a neighboring homestead. Owen paced outside until the woman called him in to meet his child, red-faced and squalling, cradled in Olivia's tired arms. "She's perfect," he whispered, afraid to touch the tiny being they had created. Olivia smiled up at him, exhausted but radiant. "She has your eyes." "And your spirit, I think," he replied, noting the way the infant's tiny fists waved defiantly at the world. "She'll be strong like her mother." Life settled into a new rhythm with Catherine's arrival. The school continued to grow, with Olivia teaching while wearing the baby in a sling across her chest. Owen expanded his operations, hiring 2 permanent hands to help with the increasing herd and crops. By Catherine's first birthday, the homestead had grown into a proper ranch, with additional buildings and fenced pastures stretching toward the horizon. They hosted a celebration that brought neighbors from miles around, the yard filled with laughter and music late into the evening. As the last guests departed, Olivia stood in the doorway of the cabin, their first home, now used as a schoolroom while they lived in the larger house Owen had built the previous autumn. Catherine slept against her shoulder, exhausted from the excitement of the day. Owen approached, dusty from seeing the last wagon safely on its way. "Happy?" he asked, his arms sliding around her waist. Olivia leaned into him, thinking of the journey that had brought her here from the rain-soaked woman he had found on the plains to the confident rancher's wife and teacher she had become. "Completely," she replied. "And you?" He looked out over their land at the life they had built together. "I never imagined I could have this," he admitted. "After the war, I thought I was meant to be alone. And now," he turned to her, his eyes reflecting the sunset, "now I know I was meant to find you in that storm, to make that promise to keep you safe." He touched Catherine's downy head gently. "To create this family." As if on cue, thunder rumbled in the distance, a spring storm gathering on the horizon. Olivia glanced at the darkening sky. Speaking of storms, Owen smiled and took Catherine from her arms. "Let's get inside, I'll put her to bed." Later, as rain pelted the roof and lightning illuminated their bedroom in brief, brilliant flashes, they lay entwined beneath the quilts, talking softly of the future. Another baby, perhaps, expanding the school, the railway that was rumored to be coming through Fort Benton within the year. When a particularly loud thunderclap shook the house, Olivia instinctively moved closer to Owen, who tightened his arm around her. "Still afraid of storms?" he asked gently. She shook her head, her cheek against his chest. "No, not anymore, not when I'm with you." Owen kissed the top of her head. "I'll always keep you safe," he murmured, "just like I promised." Outside, the storm continued its symphony, but within the walls they had built together, all was warmth and security. Olivia thought of that first night, huddled beneath Owen's hat as the rain poured down, and marveled at the journey that had brought them here to this moment. This life, this love that had blossomed from a chance encounter on the Montana plains. "I love you, Owen Xanders," she whispered, knowing that whatever storms life might bring, they would weather them together.